My name is Meera Mahadevan. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Global Policy and Strategy. I'm also affiliated with the 21st Century India Center here at UC San Diego. So something I wanted to chat about today in particular was a research question related to what happens when you focus on leader identity and the enforcement of environmental policies. So in the context of India, for instance, one of the biggest challenges faced by the country today is the significant air pollution problem. One of the biggest contributors to air pollution, more than 50% of it, is because of crop burning practices across the country. This is a pretty common practice. It isn't just limited to India. It happens in a lot of countries around the world where you want to clear a field very quickly after harvesting one crop and getting it ready for the next. This is a very significant contributor to air pollution, and over the last couple of decades, the government has tried various things in order to cut this down. However, even though it's outlawed, often enforcement of policies banning crop burning remain pretty poor. So a question we were interested in asking was, okay, instead of focusing on the policy itself, why don't we focus on who's enforcing the policy? So in thinking about leader identity, we sort of focus on the gender of the leader, male versus female leaders. And so in the context of India, we wanted to ask the question, what happens when female leaders and male leaders are engaged in a very close election and the female leader ends up winning? What we find is that the election of the female leaders results in an almost 13% decline in crop burning incidents and a huge follow-through effect, 40% decline in biomass-related particulate matter in the atmosphere. So in order to understand why we observe these large differences between what male and female leaders were able to achieve at state level, we conducted a large survey at village level of female and male leaders. Punjab is interesting in that it's a very patriarchal society, but in order to combat this at village level, the state introduced 50% of all village leadership seats being reserved for women, which works in our favor because we're able to get sort of equal representation from both male and female leaders at village level. And when we interviewed them about their attitudes towards crop burning, what they thought were the most negative impacts, a few salient differences came about. So one of the big differences between what we saw, between what the male and the female leaders said, was the female leaders systematically reported crop burning as a much more serious issue than the male leaders did. They also differed systematically in what they considered as the biggest negative impacts of crop burning. The female leaders focused much more on the negative impacts on child health, while the male leaders tended to focus on things like soil health or crop health. In a follow-through, we sort of wanted to understand what it is about these practices that helped the female leaders reduce crop burning to such a significant degree. Was it just that they enforced policies to a stricter degree? Were they fining the farmers more? And what also came out of the survey was female leaders just seemed so much more aware of all of the government policies related to crop burning. They were also aware of various incentives in place for farmers to avoid crop burning. So something that they focused a lot on was various methods of crop residue management, which are just alternatives to crop burning. And this is something they actively promoted, and possibly why we see this large impact. I think one of the biggest takeaways from the study is that when you have different groups of people who might be affected by a certain crisis, so for example, the various impacts of climate change, or in this particular instance, the impacts of crop burning or the impacts of high temperatures, when different groups are affected differently, you want to be in a position where at leadership level, both in terms of making laws as well as enforcing them, you want voices from all of these different groups.